And we're live, so happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome back to our NoCodeOps Live Community Show. And it's great to see you back here with us. I can see already like familiar faces in the chat. And actually, let me know where you're joining us from. Why not? Let's drop a comment in the chat. And if this is your first time here, we are NoCodeOps, so welcome. We're an international community for operations professionals that are scaling up their career today thanks to the innovation and the power of no code. And I'm quite excited for our event today, this Thursday, because we have a really special guest speaker. Joining us today will be the one and only co-founder and CEO at NoCodeOps, Philip Lakin. So without further ado, let me get him in. Hi,
Oh,
Phil.
hey.
How are you today?
Doing it right, and yourself?
Yeah, not so bad, not so bad. I'm really, really, really happy and grateful to have you here today. I know how busy you are, and I equally know how much value you can share with the community and with the broader audience out there. So thank you so much for making the time.
Oh my gosh, Claudia, come on. Of course, it's our company, right? And anything, right? Like, I'm so jazzed. I'm so happy to be here and do this. This is great.
Absolutely. And Phil, I guess one of the first questions that I usually ask my guests, before we dive into the topic of today, which is, from Scrappy to scaled operations, I just want to know a little bit more about you. So, how did you get into no code in the first place?
Yeah. When we're preparing for this, you'd said to me like, I feel like a lot of people in the community don't know your background or like kind of how you came into this. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess we haven't talked about that much like directly with our own kind of community. So happy to give you the background. I have a bit of a weird background in that, I was an actor before I was in tech. And so, I was very average at waiting tables, never really kind of, made my way up to the 5-star dining. And ended up doing a lot of guerrilla marketing and promotions and eventually started my own company doing that. And then one of our clients, Get, who's an Israeli-based Uber competitor who had location in New York at the time, Aqua hired me and my team. We went there and they asked me to turn the pen and paper process of onboarding a rideshare driver into a digitized process and be able to do it in the field. So the driver wouldn't have to come to our office. We could do it right in the airport parking lot at like LaGuardia or JFK in New York. And so I asked, great, who do I work with in the tech team? And they said, you're the tech team. I said, great. And so just like most no code operators, I just learned by doing and figuring things out. And, eventually took like an hour process down to like 20 minutes. And it was all digitized with, tools like Zapier and Google Sheets and Pronto Forms. And then I got headhunted at a company called Compass to do something very similar for the real estate agents. And still to this day, Compass is a public company. And if you onboard today as a real estate agent, you're going through the no code journey that me and my colleagues at the time worked on together.
Oh, no way. That's awesome. That's so cool.
And yeah. And Claudia, your screen went black, just so you know.
Oh, okay. Did it?
Yeah,
Can
no idea why, but figure I'll let you know. And then but I can still hear you. And yeah, and then from there, found out that no code was a term that people cared about. And I got really jazzed because I was like, wow, there's other people like me that think about this stuff and care about this stuff. And that led to me like finding other no coders. But a lot of the talk in the industry a few years back was really about being a maker or a builder or building MVP as a founder, not necessarily being an ops professional. So started the newsletter. Newsletter's now, over 10,000 folks and turned into, community. And Claudia, bringing you on. I think Claudia just left. And no, and we'll probably rejoin in a second.
Yeah.
There she is. We're good. And so, yeah. And so eventually, started the community, the newsletter, and then built product. And here we are.
Amazing, amazing. Well, that's great to hear, Phil. And I loved so many things that you've said about that journey, especially the fact that you were kind of given the no code ops role and you kind of had to learn that on the job. And I feel like to some level, that still happens at so many companies today. And some of the people we have in the community were just given, the challenge to digitalize their operations. And speaking of operations, should we bring on your screen, get
Yeah,
started?
let's jump right in.
Amazing. And it's great to see, all the friends in the chat: Dominic, Jared, Jason,
I love
Bubbles,
seeing y'all
all the
here. This is
friends,
great.
all the friends.
Cool. So I'm going to move my screen over here, and here we go. Let me go to slideshow mode. So
Perfect.
cool. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, all good.
Awesome. Cool. And then Claudia, just, I'm going to move my my chat with everybody over here, and that way I can see the chat as well while I'm going into this. Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. So this was a talk I worked on. The amazing folks at Zapier, we helped create this at Zap Connect, and then I also shared it at the NoCode conference, the NoCode Summit in Paris. And I've made some few updates to it and wanted to present it to our community. And so here we go. So I call this going from scrappy to scaled in no-code operations, mainly because a lot of us start really scrappy and don't know how to do this stuff, and it just gets thrown upon us, or all of a sudden we're now responsible for major systems and never had like a history in this, or went to school for CS or development or systems architecture or admin. And so this talk's all about being more purposeful in that transition for when you start getting buy-in. So I talked a little bit about this earlier, but my journeys, I went from being an actor to starting my own business, to scaling no-code systems at Get and Compass, and then eventually started NoCodeOps. So very similarly to like a lot of the folks in the no-code world, my background wasn't traditionally in tech or development or systems. And it's funny because in our community, I feel like we have a lot of arts professionals, a lot of, teachers like Claudia, who used to, be a teacher, and so on and so forth. So NoCodeOps has grown, like I said earlier, over 10,000 subscribers, over 900 community, or now we're over 1,200 community members. We've also started a NoCodeOps job board and introduced gigs there, where it's a free job board where we've already done $75,000 in just gigs, not even including all the full-time roles we help land for folks. And after 2 years and over 300 customer dev interviews with folks in our community, we've built Operator, which is now in beta. And just to kind of give you a sneak peek to that, one of the things that we found in scaling operations was that everybody that we talked to who was really scaling no-code automation at their company ended up building this massive spreadsheet of like, here's every automation in our company, here's what it does, here's the components that touch it, here's the fields that are in it, here's who owns it, here's the runs and errors for it. And they would keep this thing manually updated. And it was like the last thing they tried and the first thing that worked. And the funny thing is that, we saw this same spreadsheet almost identical across like at least 30 different orgs, and they had never talked to each other about it. So like there was clearly a need here. And so what we've done with Operators, automated that process. So now in Operator, you can do things like see all of this stuff in one place, automatically updated. We automatically update all of your dependencies. So, you're messing, with a webhook, or you're looking for a, I'm about to mess with this Airtable field. You can see every Zap it's hooked up to automatically and up to date, including a live change log, issue alerting, error handling, all of that stuff. So we work with Zapier today. We're working on Make Next. We are very excited about it. Any questions, let me know. So back to you. The rise, what I call like the rise of the ops hero. This is the typical, like, I don't know, Claudia, if you've ever seen like the hero's journey, but this is like what I call, the ops hero journey, where you get tasked with automating something like lead routing, something like very basic. You've got no support from your dev team. And then all of a sudden you find something like Zapier and you become the hero. Right? Everyone's like, you're amazing. You did the thing and you had no support. But then what happens is what I call like the paradox of success, right? So you do this thing, you're all really happy, but like all good things, they don't last. So word spreads, and now the marketing team wants in. And they've got new ideas and they want to test out automations. And, your sales leadership, has like a weekly quick request to add something new, or other departments want in and they're like, hey, we don't want you to build the automations. We want to do it ourselves. So now you're responsible for training folks, and more departments are doing more automations that are impacting one another. And so you now have to balance building what got you to, building, which is like what got you to this place, and maintaining all of this other stuff that happened as a result of your success here. And so what I like to say to folks is, what got you here won't get you there. And this is what I mean by that. So what got you to this point where you achieve this internal success with your company, and you were experimenting with no-code tools? You built first and asked questions later, right? You just signed up for stuff, you tried stuff, and you asked questions about it later. Documentation is all in your head. You don't have any documentation. What's the point? Like, you're building, it's for you. And, there's not a lot of transfer of knowledge going on, and you don't have time to document. You're just the builder and maintainer. You're typically ignoring errors until they impact others or something super, super critical. And there's no need to really prove ROI because there is no investment. Like, there's little to no investment in your no-code stack at this point. So that is like that scrappy version of you as the ops professional that got you to success on this front. This is what got you to this point. So the goal here for this presentation is to show you how to kind of flip all of these things to start working for you as now you're starting to scale. So let's say you've got some buy-in, maybe you're able to open up a rec for a job that, now supports you with automation, more departments want in. So let's take all of those things that got you here and let's flip the script on them and show you how you can now turn those into ways to be even more successful in this kind of new environment. So you used to, build first, ask later. So now it's the reverse. You've got to ask first and build later. So one thing I always tell no-code operations professionals is start with problems, not solutions. Now I know we love our shiny toys. Claudia loves the shiny toys. Everyone in the chat loves the shiny toys. I love the shiny toys. But those shiny toys, once you start scaling internally at your organization, are not the things that are going to get people excited. What they're excited about is relief of the pain that they're feeling from their problems. And so when you get an idea as that ops person, I always recommend, when you're on a call with somebody at your company, they're like, man, I'm really struggling manually doing this. The first thing you should say is not, oh, I know a tool for that, right? I know that's what we all want to say. But really it should be, can you tell me more about that? And dive into that problem. The analogy I like to give here is, if you go to a doctor's office with some kind of problem or condition and you just start talking and 1 minute later, the doctor goes, I know the medication for you. Like, you don't trust that doctor as much as someone who really dives into your symptoms and when this started and gets all the diagnostics, because they're going to come up with a better solution for you. And so same thing with other stakeholders. Dive into their problems, get nitty gritty and deep into their problems. The end product shouldn't be a surprise. Involve others early and often. If the end product you deliver or process or dashboard or app or integration that you deliver at the end of a project is a surprise to people, I think you probably haven't done a really good job in involving other stakeholders. And that's fine when you're the only stakeholder. But when other people are involved, you should be diving into the problem with them, getting their thoughts, maybe even having them help you select a vendor from a short list, right? Get people involved early and often. And you don't want anyone coming in at the last minute and shutting everything down either. So involve folks. And lastly, creating an automation lifecycle, automation development lifecycle is really important. So when we're creating automation, it's like, is it on or is it off, right? That's pretty much what you need to know. But when multiple people are involved in building automations that could potentially impact each other, it's important for people to be on the same page. So one thing that we've actually seen beta users in Operator do with their zaps is we have a tagging feature where folks will tag their zaps on different stages of an automation development lifecycle. So beyond just on or off as a status, are they active or not, they'll use stages like this is an idea, this is experimental, this is live, this is under maintenance, this is being deprecated, this is being handed off. So they'll use these different stages to indicate where their automation is in terms of the life cycle. One of the really smart thing we've seen operator beta folks do on this front that I love is they could say they have like 2 live statuses. This is live for personal use, or this is live for team use. And when it's live for team use, sometimes they have stage gates where they'll go, what that means internally is that like more than one person knows what's going on here, or this is documented in Operator more thoroughly. And so really good things to point out there. Fostering a culture of documentation. So right, in the past, you didn't have to document anything because you were the person, you were building the stuff. So now documenting becomes really important. So I always like to say here, start documenting what you wish you had and just make it very simple, right? Like if you wish you had something by way of documentation where it's like, you know, I wish anytime I changed an automation, there was some place to look where I could see every endpoint connected to that automation. Of course, Operator does that, but you know, you can also do that manually too. Actually, soon releasing a manual way to do that too, which is really exciting. Just best practice documentation stuff. But another example there, right, is I wish I knew who fixed the error with this automation last and what they did and how they fixed it. So if you're sitting there wishing that, because people try to just boil the entire ocean. Best practices here are focusing on consistency over extensiveness. And one of the best ways to do that is say, like, here's 3 things that we want for every automation. We want to know who the owner is of the automation, what larger processes this thing is a part of, or even like who would be impacted by this or who needs to be a decision maker upon a change here, right? And I actually know Zapier is really some great functionality on this front for like change requests right natively into the platform. So I think documenting those is really important.
And I guess also for your own personal development field, like to look at yourself and what you've built. Like if you're documenting today, you know, 2 years down the line, you can look at what you were doing and see the progress that you've done, or just like build on top of that documentation itself. So it's really, really great to show how far you've gone as well.
100, I couldn't agree anymore. Like seeing how you thought about things and being able to track that, and for your personal development is huge. But when it comes to your professional development, it's also really big because the bigger your automations get at your company, and the more parts of your company that they touch, you know, you're going to need buy-in from devs and IT folks. And if they see that you're proactively documenting things, you will get more of their buy-in faster. I also think there's documentation types, which are like architecture, user journey, and how to use this. So architecture is really related to like how this thing was built, why it was built, what it impacts. The user journey is what's a user journey either of the data or of the user as they go through this thing, right? So it starts with a form. So maybe you have a picture of the form, and then, you know, it goes to this Zap, and then it goes to, you know, say an Airtable base where someone has to click, okay, approved or not, right? So, you know, what is the user journey? And then there's great tools out there like Tango that really help with the how to use this. So for your end user, when they're using, you know, a form or a Zapier interface or a, you know, a CRM stage, having like something like Tango that shows how the end user should interact with this thing is also a good form of documentation to keep in mind. And then covering both like the how this works and why this was built, I think is always really important. Because yeah, why will help you in the future. Brace for error impact. So when you're building stuff and it's on the smaller level and it's just Slack notifications or just one process or two, processes that you own, errors are no big deal, right? You can handle them. They're easy. If an error happens when, in the forest, when no one's around, did it even error, right? So like, it doesn't really matter as much. But when other teams are involved and other stakeholders are involved and you're responsible for this stuff, or even if other team members are building automations and you're the main champion at your company for an automation platform like Zapier or Make, like this will come back to you. And you want to keep these tools. So you want to stay on top of this stuff. So one of the things here is implementing monitoring tools and workflows. Zapier just introduced an amazing error handling, custom error handling tool the other day, which is in beta, which is really exciting, where you can add branches if something errors out and like custom actions there, which I think is amazing. So I highly recommend doing that for sensitive workflows. I also recommend, using Zapier Manager and for some like very specific alerts, stuff like operator as well. But like do something to monitor your errors, even if it's getting everything into one inbox or a Zapier Manager that's sending things into Slack that someone is responsible for checking, right? And a big thing there is separating noise from signal, and that's where I think tools like Operator and Zapier's native new error handler that you can put on specific zaps, I think are really important in doing that. Because you can just say only for certain automations when they break, I want an alert. That way you're not just getting emails on emails and emails for every halt or whatever. When role-based access control doesn't cut it or the tool doesn't have it, there are very creative, hacky ways that we've seen our operator beta users use, and also just like other folks in the no-code community we've seen use. So great example of this. Everyone needs to be able to edit something in Airtable. What we've seen folks do is literally in Airtable put a lock icon in a field name and just tell everybody, if you see a lock icon on a field name or in a view, do not change that. Do not edit it, right? Because it can be hooked
That's
up
what you've done with me.
Yes. And you've done it to me too, right? So like, I think it's a really good way to stay on top of stuff. Because there's a multitude of reasons why you wouldn't want a field touch. It could be hooked up to an app script. It could be hooked up to an internal automation. It could be hooked up to a formula, right? And so really good way to just do that in a really, I think, kind of in a simple manual way. And then every automation should have a single point of accountability. I just think that's really, really important as you start to scale, right? There's no part of a code base that somebody isn't responsible for when people are coding things. There's no database that someone's not responsible for when the data part of an org starts to grow. And so I think the same should be true for automations. And one trick here, it's not always the owner, or the builder is not always the owner. Sometimes they're different. And linking errors and resolutions to relevant documentation. So if something, it's like I mentioned earlier, if something fails and you write a really good, like, this is why this failed, this is what we did, here's what to keep in mind in the future, make that linkable and findable to the documentation around that thing. In Operator, we even have like a notes section for all of your automations, but like you can even do that in something as simple as a Notion or the notes part of a Zap, right? So I think keeping those things tied together are really, really important. ABCD, and I only did dividends as a word here because it was the only D word I could find that made sense in this context. But always be communicating dividends.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And so, when it's just you building an automation and, you just get to build it and you're happy it works and maybe your manager's stoked and that's it. But now when the whole company is building stuff, or you're building stuff for the whole company, and you've got to defend budget, it's really like us as operations folks think, well, when things are just smooth, everyone will recognize that things are great. But that's not what happens. You've got to show the work, right, to folks and internally market stuff. And that'll be good for both your professional career and for getting more buy-in. So showing your work that you've done with either roadmaps or feedback loops. One thing I did at Compass that was really, really great was we used like a product feedback board that typically companies use externally. We used internally. We used something called Canny, Canny. And it was basically just like an upvote board for people to vote on features, but for our internal no code work. And we would keep people updated on like, with a feedback loop of like, hey, we just implemented this, thanks, or, we would show our management, hey, like we took in, 50 pieces of feedback. We actually actioned 10 of them. Here's what we did. We were able to move way faster than if the Salesforce org owned this because we own this directly. Highlighting specific success stories, just like you like going to a software landing page and seeing some success stories and it gives you confidence. Well, guess what? You should be getting those success stories from some of your end users and highlighting them to management. Same exact thing. This person saved this amount of time, even if it's a small quote. We earned this much, revenue. We saved this much lost revenue, etc. And then I think outside of the cash side of things, and I know that's like the easiest one to play to, there's other ways to showcase ROI. And I, with his permission, stole this directly from Mike Cardona, who, runs Hidden Levers. And I put the link here, tinyurl.com/hiddenleversai will take you right to this worksheet that Mike has built, all about all the different KPIs you can show. It's a whole worksheet. And here are some of them, right? Time saving, cost reduction, error reduction, increased output, improved data quality, higher customer satisfaction. You can get way more creative. And I know in ops we have to, right? Because like we're not always so close to the revenue centers. So showing these ROI components, I think really, really important. I hope it gives you some ideas. Here's an example of a KPI tracker, right? So when you're showing off your work internally to either management or whoever, right? You say, okay, the automation, this is the automation name. Here's a very simple description. Here were the goals. And then you can have some benchmarks, right? So currently we're spending 15 hours manually every week doing this thing. We had 20% data discrepancies. We had 10% negative feedback. And then here's like just some very high level current metrics versus targets. Now we're saving 10 hours a week out of the 15. We have a 20%, error reduction, right? And we have 25% positive feedback, right? And so like showing these things and how they change over time continues to get you buy-in. And make sure that you're benchmarking things like when you start, because not everyone will be as close to you or the very, very close stakeholder to something before it was, when it was a problem. So really good to get benchmarks.
And also, if I can add something there, I feel like ROI is like if we slightly shift the perspective. So for me personally, whenever I think about ROI, it's almost like you have to prove to your manager or whatever the work that you're doing is bringing these, X results, right? And that's how I see ROIs. But if you move that perspective and you think about it in a way that is more like, okay, this is working, not for somebody else's sake, but if I look at it, if I see my improvement and the progress, how can I multiply, how can I scale what just happened? So even for you, like, don't think that you have to do the ROI reports and stuff necessarily for someone else, but just like for you as an operator, how can you multiply, how can you scale whatever you did that brought that increase in percentage, that growth? Yeah,
Claudia, you're dead on there. And that also just made me think that like building these ROI reports are not only important for external kind of like, or your leadership or management or others are getting buy-in, but it's also good for you to be honest with yourself and where you can compare things apples for apples. And if you have the ROIs on 3 different initiatives you did, you can be honest with yourself and say, you know what? I put 5 hours of work into something that saved 10 minutes. Like maybe that wasn't really the best you some time. And one of the best things that I learned when I was at Compass, and someone told this to me, and I still hold it true to this day, which is when you're working internally somewhere and you've got stakeholders, one of the best ways to interact with those stakeholders is to treat them like you are an agency and they are your clients, and you're keeping them updated, and you're trying to be as effective for them as possible with your time and with their time and with the resources at hand. And so, starting to hold yourself accountable on the ROI and KPI front, is really, really helpful here. And it'll help you prioritize. So speaking of ROI, tailoring your ROI story to other internal folks at your company changes vastly on who you're talking to. IT doesn't care about what the devs care about. Devs don't care about what the leadership team cares about. Leadership team doesn't care about the end users care about, right? And none of them care about what you care about, which is how cool this new shiny tool is, right? And so it's really important to tailor your ROI story. And so here's a great example. This is a actual Zap that we use at our company when a Webflow form submission comes in. We do some filtering. We send an email out. We add it to Airtable if they don't exist as a record yet. We send it down different paths, either if they signed up for our newsletter or, they happen to be an ICP for operator. So we, this is a large app that we use. But every single department that you were to show to, if they ever looked at this, would all have different questions. IT would say, whose auth is sending emails via Gmail? A dev might say, which version of our Webflow form is connected? The business leadership might say, how many leads are qualified versus unqualified? Can we start measuring that? And an end users who's looking at this might say something like, wait, are qualified leads not ending up on our newsletter list? Which, just so everybody knows, because it took me embarrassingly long to figure this out, paths in Zapier, it's not like your data goes down and then just goes down one path. It actually checks the conditions of every path, and if it meets those conditions, it will go down that. So actually the answer is no there. Like they will actually, if someone's a qualified lead, they'll get Slack, ping message in Slack, they're a qualified lead. And if they sign up for the newsletter, they will also get the newsletter. So here's to wrap up some quick wins before we kind of go into a Q&A here. One, as you're starting to scale, service auths versus personal auths. I'm going to say that again. Service auths versus personal auths. I have seen so many instances of, a Zap going down because somebody left an organization and they authed with Philip at NoCodeOps.com as opposed to automations at NoCodeOps.com for their Gmail account, right? If you want something to be robust and reliable and work, if you're not there or if you change roles, make sure to use service auths. Regular show and tells. One of the best things we did at Compass was once a month, me and representatives from all the different so we had 150 people in our agent operations org. One person from each region would come and show the things they built, automations they built, and hacks they were doing. And we would all learn from them. And sometimes those would then get standardized into national processes. So you don't know what you don't know. You don't know, sometimes we think we know all the ways to use a tool, but then we see how someone else uses a tool and we're like, whoa, you could do that. I'll still never forget the first time I saw someone do Command Shift down on a Google sheet. I was like, wait, you don't have to scroll all the way, right? So see how other people are doing things and organize that stuff internally if multiple people or citizen developers are building things separate from each other. Internal certification programs are great, right? Whether it's the course that 9x has, which it's go9x.com. They have an amazing course that we're actually doing a collaboration soon with at NoCodeOps. It's a course on no code for operations professionals, right? Whether it's before anyone gets hands-on, they got to learn some of the basics, right? So, if you've got people that you want to trust with certain things, just whether it's a course you create or someone else has created, just to get people on the same page and have the same language about certain things. One of the things that we've seen folks do who are operator beta users is say, look, we've got stage gates in operator saying, what stage of development this thing is in, and everyone get trained on those stage gates. This is in development, live, deprecated, etc. Make your maintenance works visible to stakeholders. I know it's so exciting to share all of the big new automations that we create, but sometimes like just making it visible to others that you're maintaining things and like, you're fixing errors, you're, adding new people to stuff like, like say you need new options, in a form, like your manager or your other stakeholders, while you're doing that work, if you don't say something. So say something about it. And lastly, if you need resources, sell pain, not benefits. And I'd say for most ops folks, this is one of the hardest things that sometimes we are so far away from a revenue center because we're in CX ops, data ops, marketing ops, which is kind of related. Rev ops has a lot easier of a time with this because they are close to the revenue centers, so they can sell benefits like more money. But when you're not, sell the pain, right? Sell life insurance. Hey, look, if these leads go down and we lose leads, this is like how much money we lose a day, right? Like sell the pain, sell the story of what would happen if we don't do this, or if we don't start documenting, or if we don't, start investing in more robust automations. But yeah, Claudia, that's kind of like it from me. I'll stop sharing my screen and happy to jam with you or answer, any questions that folks have.
Absolutely. I'm surprised you don't have community in your quick wins.
Ooh, major fail.
No, absolutely. Join a community and share resources and all those show and tells, you know where to find them. If you're watching this today, I'm sure you know where to find them.
Yep. And I think Claudia just dropped out again. Here I am.
Here I am.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I keep having this studio. It says error 5. So maybe any operator here could tell me what that means. It
We had
keeps
talked to
crashing.
Streamlabs.
Yeah, it keeps crashing. Anyway, thank you so much, Phil. So many actionable tips, and I knew that you have so much knowledge. And truly, like whenever I, regardless of, we obviously both work for the same company, your company, but regardless of that, whenever somebody asks me for advice or business tips or how do I scale, can I do this better, I always refer them to you. And I would highly encourage anyone watching this event today or in the future to connect with Philip, because he has an extensive knowledge on all this, and as you can see, lots of actionable practical tips that you can use from tomorrow, if not from today. So thank you so much for that. Like I truly appreciate it, and I'm so grateful that I am fortunate, because I get to learn and grow by watching your work every day. So thank you for that.
It's been you've just been such an awesome collaborator, and it's what's so meta, Claudia, is that not only do we have a community on this front, but like we're also always working on internal no code projects together. So we're trying as much as possible to practice what we preach here, right? And do all of this kind of work internally as well. But yeah, no, this is super cool. Like am I anywhere near the best like hands-on no coder from the standpoint of like, I know everything there is to know about Zapier or Airtable or Make or Smart Suite or anything like that? No, I'm not. Right. There are people in our community that are way better than me. Right. Like, but what I can say is like, if you ever need help on the like selling this internally, scaling this internally, getting buy-in, starting to just grow the impact of automations and make what you've done known to your team and secure budget, that is like where I'm like, I really am happy to help.
Yeah, and here's Phil's LinkedIn for you all to send him a connection request if you're not connected already. All right, so let's get started with our Q&A. I have a couple questions from the forum, but I would highly encourage the people that are watching the stream live right now. This is your opportunity to interact with Phil, so make the most of it. And while we wait for the first couple questions to get in the chat, let me just pull up the form and get you started with the first question. All right, so let's see. From Franklin, Is there a framework for building scalable systems?
Yeah, there are several frameworks for building scalable systems. I mean, look, there are tons of methodologies here, right? Like there's, Agile and Scrum, right? There's so many. I think when it specifically relates to no code and systems work, the thing that I at least like to start with folks is like, you typically have a bunch of resources already at your disposal, right? So the systems the company is already using, maybe some new stuff that you find shiny and new and interesting, right? But the biggest like recommendation I have there is, one, just like an external product, diving into the problem with folks, getting really, really nitty gritty on like, does this system even need to exist? Does the system take precedent over other systems? If this system needs to exist, what's the most simple version of this thing that can exist to prove value, to gain further adoption and buy-in, right? You basically take it through the same framework that you would any MVP externally. So reading things like lean B2B or the lean startup, right? Like taking those ideas and just bringing those ideas and frameworks into what you're already doing is so important. Also, another one I will never shut up about it is the mom test, right? Like having mom test style conversations with your internal stakeholders, right? And being very skeptical about someone just saying, I want a solution or, for this, or, okay, well, why? Let's dig into that. What's the problem, right? And so it's the same stuff as building an external MVP. The only difference is your buy-in is like usage, attention, etc. I've seen so many times people just go like, well, I'm building the system and everyone's got to deal with it because they're internal. So I'm just going to do what we want. And like, they have to adopt it, because they have to. And it's like, that's a great way to piss a lot of people.
Yeah, what not to do.
Yeah.
What not to do. And I love our community feel because obviously they're coming to the rescue and they're telling me error 5 is usually a permission issue. What app are you using? Jason, I'm using Talk Studio by OBS. If you can troubleshoot that in the background, forever grateful. I love it. And speaking of Jason, we have an amazing question here. Let me just put it up. At the 50, 100 employees C to Series A stage, who typically owns system management, IT infrastructure, IT team, engineering, both?
Awesome question. So typically what we've seen on that front, because we talk to a ton of companies on that front, NoCodeOps, there's typically some go-to-market function that has started to use these types of systems or no-code automations and systems. And so they have started spinning things up. And maybe they got permission from IT, maybe they didn't, maybe they collaborated with a dev, maybe they didn't. But like they had some type of need that they couldn't solve internally with devs or just within the systems they're using themselves, or, and so they added more systems and built, added no code automations, et cetera. And so typically it starts in some type of go-to-market team. So it could be CX, it could be revenue, it could be sales, it could be marketing, et cetera. And we've seen on the smaller side, it is typically owned on a team by team basis. As companies grow, and depending on their level of maturity, even in the 50 to 100 stage, IT can sometimes either be a partner, take over, or we have seen, on the higher side of that, more towards the 100, 200 side, there tends to be like a biz ops team or an IT systems team that starts to get involved. And they start to also bring in their own systems. That's like where you see tools like Workato really come in, and where it's like really being owned by the IT folks as opposed to like the functional people. And then there always ends up being that battle between the two. But I'd say that the big kind of the scale that we see is like, it typically starts in a team that needs it right away for something very, very, like there's a very concrete need. And then other departments find out and it starts to grow. And then at some point, IT steps in and says, let's either partner with you or take ownership of this thing on some level. That's like the kind of trajectory that we've seen.
Brilliant. Let me get another really good question here.
See, Jared just put in chat here. What kind of advice do you have for a small business owner who's trying to make the most efficient use of his time while wearing all of the hats? It's a great.
I wonder who that small business owner is, Jared.
That's a great question.
I'm asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend named Jared. So look, I'm going to say something a little controversial here because we are an ops community and we love ops and we love building ops and doing all of this stuff, right? But the reality is you're never going to operationalize your way from 0 to 1 or to success, right? Like you can have the most beautiful CRM, perfectly labeled, the best automations, right, at your company. And those things are not what are gonna get new customers. You know what I mean? They're not gonna drive revenue necessarily. Those operational things become really, really important when stuff has become a mess or is about to be a huge mess because of a major influx or something, or other, right? And so, and of course, like, look, there's automations for content operations and stuff, and that is part of the funnel, and so that does help, and but like the way that I always think about it is when you're trying to make the most of your time, right? For me, I'm always thinking, right in this mode, in this time that I have right now, this hour, am I trying to kind of grow the business, or am I trying to stabilize the business or a part of the business? And my ops hat is definitely like the stabilization mode, right? And my kind of growth side, like sometimes is really, really manual and scrappy and has nothing to do with automations and anything like all the cool, sexy stuff that I like doing and building. I literally put out a tweet about this earlier that like I'll sometimes spend 3 hours building a 10-minute automation, that save like 10 minutes when I shouldn't be, right? And I fall into that trap because I love this stuff. But when I think about what's most efficient for my time, I think about what are the 1 or 2 things I want to be driving the needle the most on right now? And is this going to have any impact on that? Because what feels good to do and what is actually good for the business to do are not always the same things. Sometimes they are, right? But I've got to pull myself out on a regular basis and go like, what's the most impactful thing I could be doing for the company right now that I'm the most well-suited to be doing, right? Sometimes we're replying to a customer email. Sometimes it could be building an automation, right? And so that I try to think about it through that lens as much as I can.
Yeah, that's really, really wise. Thank you for sharing that, Phil. Question from Jordan. How do you remain agile and fast as things scale? Documentation, etc., takes time. So how do you keep this dynamic as the business grows?
That's a great question. So one, not to plug you McPlugstein, but that's literally why we built Operator, right? So that we could automatically handle your 95% of your documentation for you. So you don't have to do it on your own and still get the benefits of documentation, right? But two, it really comes down to this, right? You have to look at the full life cycle of an automation, okay? So you're thinking about it, you're building it, you're maybe documenting it, you're changing it, maybe there's an error, you're debugging it, maybe you're handing off someone, whatever, or you're deprecating it, right? It's a full life cycle. The thing is that if 5 minutes of writing something down and documenting something could save you or someone else 3 or 4 hours of digging through logs when they're trying to fix an error, or like putting a little lock icon somewhere to make sure, like, and training people like don't mess with any field with a lock icon, right? Or like, please check operator before you're messing with any field to see what zaps it's being hooked up to, where, who owns those, what part of a process they're a part of. Like doing that one little thing can save a ton of time. And you know what? Maybe you haven't had that experience yet, right? And so you're like, well, all good, right? We typically don't talk to folks to operator until they've had a major meltdown at some point. And they're like, wow, we really could have used this, right? And so it's hard to sell that stuff until you've gone through it. But once you've gone through it and you've had enough experience there, you get to those break points. You get to change management becomes really hard. And so, like I said, thinking about what's the bare minimum that you can do to help your future self and other, folks. The other thing I'll say there is that's where templates are your best friend. Sometimes the hardest part about documenting something is the cognitive load of looking at a white blank page, being like, where do I freaking start? And so having a template of just like, here's the 3 things, after every build session I write down. Here's the 3 things after every, error fix I write down. And here's where they're stored. Making it so simple and part of your workflow, it'll eventually feel like second nature. So keep it small, keep it simple, keep it consistent, and make sure that it's tied back to the value that you or your team are going to need. Because the worst thing to happen, right, is like someone in the, another team messes with a field that then breaks your lead workflow, and all of a sudden you're losing revenue for weeks, and you get your tools pulled away from you or control pulled away from you and back to IT, because they don't trust that you're that you can be on top of it in that sense. So that'd be my 2 cents there.
A question from Bubbles here. How do you approach automation in general, and can you identify areas to automate, especially as a founder?
Yeah, for sure. When it comes to automation, I typically try to, I try to do things manually as much as I can at first, is the reality. And if I find myself just doing a lot of copy pasting or a lot of just like, going between multiple screens or whatever, or, I look for the things that are very manual that take up a lot of time for me and my team, is like big areas of opportunities for automation, is the first thing. The second thing I do is like, can I just ship something to see if like this makes it better or kind of harder? I'll give you a great example. We just like set up this like one new form for like our beta program that like, it's like I was trying to automate too much of it, and it ended up creating not as good of an experience. And so like I had to remove some of the automations from it. So like being open to that and like being experimental there, I think is really great. I also try to set aside some part of my day, at least, once or twice a week, to look at new tools, to think about what I can automate, right? Like where there's like that experimental time where I can be a little bit more proactive. As a founder, I can talk from my experience of the things that I've automated that have been really, really, really amazing for me. I use a tool called Meet Alfred, where I actually go and it helps me automatically reach out to the right folks on LinkedIn. So basically on LinkedIn, I found myself just like, if I saw someone, is potentially a great fit for our community or for operator, I would like be manually reaching out to them with like pretty much the same message and like sending them a connection request and, sending a follow-up note if they accepted. I'm like, there's got to be a better way for this. And so I use Meet Alfred to save me a ton of time on that front. So pretty much every day I get 5 or 6 new people that have accepted my connection request that are excited to talk. But what's funny is there was a lot of manual work that went to making that work, right? Because one, we had to put together the list of folks that we wanted to reach out to, and that was manual. And 2, all of the work I do on LinkedIn and just like talking about no code and being an advocate for the community, I think it makes people more likely to like accept a request on this front, and as opposed to just being like, someone's selling me something, like I genuinely want to see if you want to come into the community because looks like you might get a lot of value from it and our community might get a lot of value from you being there. And so, yeah, I'd say Meet Alfred is one. And then the other thing I actually found myself starting to use today, automation wise, is I do a lot of email correspondence with folks in our operator beta. And I'm starting to do a tiny bit of CX and a bunch of CRM work in ADIO, ATTIO. And so they've got a really great Chrome extension that I use if I'm in an email with someone where I can just like update the deal status like right from the email. It's really, really nice.
We'll have to cut.
Oh, she'll come back. I'm gonna see what else we got here. I use an Asana task template on an automation board to capture life cycle. So good. That is the ticket. Like, I'm so happy to see that. Rad.
I was saying, Phil, we have to cut out some time for us next week when I'll be in Atlanta for a little premature adoption time. You use all these amazing tools. I want to see you in action with them. Meet Alfred, like, come on. What is that? Love it.
It's so good. It's running in the background every day for me. It's like amazing. And it just makes it so much more efficient.
That's so cool. And I saw a question that I thought you might really like from Sergio here. Which patterns do you find most common to organize the processes, have failure alerts, and keep track of errors?
Which ones do you find most common to organize the process? Yeah, it's a really good question. So a few things. One is, look, if there's an error in a Zap, you can now like set a default path, or a new path for that, just based like, okay, something errored here, you can get an alert on that. One thing I like to do, and I know I'm a little crazy for this, but like I will go into the end result of an automation every now and then and audit what type of data is coming in there. It's actually something we're thinking about for operator, like way down the road, around like, how do you work with like this type of stuff more proactively? But something I do manually on like a semi-regular basis is like, I'll go into certain columns I know are being updated by automations and go like, is this looking like what it needs to look like? Because an automation can work and not fail, but the data cannot be correct. And so I do like to do spot checks on audits on a regular basis on that front. The other pattern that I look for, and this is like something that's really, really rad. Can I share my screen here for a second,
Yeah,
Claudia?
sure. Absolutely.
Where is my... Pull this open.
And by the way, audience and friends, promise you I'm really composing myself every time the screen crashes. Like
I'm sure you're there like, ah! All right, let me share my
little
screen.
meditation time.
Share screen. I understand. Share operator.
But also what the NoCodeOps...
Oh, she dropped out. I'm sure she's not at all cursing at the wind. This is the only, by the way, y'all, this is the only time it's ever happened. You know what other patterns I look for in errors is when Streamlabs just keeps quitting.
But also I was saying like something that the community has taught me is APIs, which thank you so much, 9X and all the people, Chris, Coleman, we had a whole series based on APIs, Planet of the APIs. Go and check it out on YouTube. It makes me think that because it's permission, and I know that LinkedIn doesn't share the APIs as openly like any other platforms. It might be that, I don't know. I'll investigate, I promise. But here we go.
So this is operator for those of you that haven't seen it before. But one thing I like to do also here in operator. So we basically took all the best practices from every spreadsheet we saw and turned it into a web app that's automatically updated. So here's all your Zaps. You can move them around. You can sort by them, right, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing I like to do is I actually just like to sort by weekly runs and errors, right? So I can say, okay, like, how many runs? Okay, well, yeah, this looks right. Or these are the things that I want to see. Or like, I would have expected something else to be up here. Also sort by weekly errors, as well. And so I can see any errors or issues that I'm having. So I use this also, and this is, available because like, I've got operator. I also pull open the operator change log on a regular basis, just see like who's making what changes where and when. And so operator can show you every single change that's happening in a Zapier environment automatically, and what changed the diff, an AI summary of the diff. And so every now and then I'll pull this open too to see like, hey, was there anyone like going in and making a ton of changes? Because we can also do like, hey, like, okay, wow, there was a ton of change this day. I want to know what happened there. This was all things that were being changed. So really, really, really helpful. But that's another way that I look at patterns.
Absolutely. And Michelle says API learning is high on my list. So Michelle, I think you're already part of our community. So come and learn
the operator,
with us.
The 9X course. It's so good.
Absolutely. And stay tuned for more goodies to come down the line in 2024. It's going to be huge. And Phil, I want to end on a really good note. I love this question from Daniel. So what are your top 3 advice for young ops professionals on what they should focus on for the next 5 years to advance their career?
That is an awesome question. Thank you so much for asking it. So I think one for sure is as ops and call it like the no code slash dev side are all getting closer and closer and closer and closer. I think one of the and systems are just like everywhere, right? I think one of the best things you can do as an ops professional is learn some of the basics of this stuff. So as ops folks, we're always sold SaaS and no code tools and this and that, right? Like guilty, right? So like you know what I mean? We're always inundated with that stuff. But the reality is, unless you understand the basics, the tools don't matter. None of the tools matter. And so one of the best things I can say is learning some of the basics, like learning the basics of APIs and databases from an operations non-technical point of view, right? Learning process mapping, right? Learning how to interview a someone to get the best quality customer data interview, even for an internal person, by reading the mom test, taking some of the 9X courses on this front, right? I think that like that is like even more important than the tools themselves. Because if you understand the basics fundamentally, you can make multiple different tools work on multiple different budgets, and you'll gain a level of trust from your other stakeholders, especially your more technical ones. And then that trust is so leverageable because the more trust you get, so like at Compass, I gained a lot of trust from our Salesforce admins. So they gave me a ton of leeway for my team that other teams didn't have. And so I was able to move faster and do things for my team that no other teams could do because they had a lot of trust in me based on all of the documentation and kind of systems thinking that I was doing with them. And so I think that's huge. I think that's one. Two is spending time in communities like NoCodeOps, like Operations Nation, right? There's some more specific ones like I think like the RevOps Co-op and Operators Collect Guild, and like spending time in communities and seeing what other folks are doing, learning from them, offering to help with them. You would be maybe not, but you might be shocked like how many times job offers just come from people talking in DMs on NoCodeOps, just being like, "Hey, I need help with this thing. I need help with this thing," and like now they're talking about a thing, and all of a sudden their company has an opening, and like that's where their next role comes from. So be active with the people in the space that really care about this stuff in these communities that have been set up for you to succeed. I'd say the third thing is just, I feel like sometimes as ops folks, a lot of us like to be in the background and like just making things work and just, we like our systems. We just want the thing to work. You know what I mean? Like we just want to be getting away and getting more comfortable with putting yourself out there and talking about your work and talking about what you do and kind of internally marketing yourself. And not believing that your work will just speak for itself, because I promise you it will not, because everybody else is also working on their own stuff, right? And finding tactful and interesting ways to do it, and breaking out of that kind of comfort zone, I think are really important.
Amazing tips. Thank you so much, Phil. And yeah, I could see a lot of support in the chat as well. Very well said. Again, I feel like last week we had a chat with Bill French, right? And I felt super inspired after that chat. And I'm feeling exactly the same today. We said it last week. I feel like the two of you should at some point have a sort of
we're going to do it.
Sort of Saturday night.
Bill and Phil's excellent adventure. And Chloe, I'm sure we'll come back in a second. But yeah, for those of you who didn't see, Bill is just like an amazing thinker on this front. Someone I've like have a huge amount of respect for. And so yeah, Claudia, that would be awesome. But Claudia, before you get booted again, we could still see your face. Should we wrap it up?
Yes, I just wanted to say, so today you've heard a lot of great tips. Thank you so much for sticking with us until the very end. We have 36 people that are been following this session, so that's fantastic to see. So thank you so much. And if you want to explore Operator a little bit more, here's a link in the chat for you to sign up to the beta. And then obviously Phil's DMs are always open. Same here with me. If you would like to join the community, we host these events every Thursday. And we also have community hangouts, automation, brews, events, troubleshooting, all of it. So do join the community. It's free. and you get a lot of value from it. So I
And
think,
Claudia, on that note, last thing I'll say there is,
sure.
first of all, thanks for having me. This is awesome. Long time listener, first time caller, or at least speaker. If you have questions about your professional career development, right? Like you're starting to moonlight or do agency work or whatever, like please do not hesitate to reach out to me in a DM on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever. Like I am more than happy to just like take a 30-minute meeting with any of y'all and just help in any way that I can, whether it's introductions, whether it's coaching, whatever it is. Like I love doing that with folks. Folks have done it for me. And so like happy to help in any way I can. Please don't feel like, oh, I need to be in the community or using Operator or like, at a certain level to be doing this, or I'm not, a total full out no coder yet. I'm just thinking about it. Like you're never too early enough to have a conversation. So feel free to reach out.
Absolutely love that. Love that. And next week, if you're in Atlanta, we're hosting an in-person hangout. So yeah, drop me a note and I'll send you the info. All right, Phil, have a great rest of your day. Have a fantastic weekend. I'll see you very soon. And everyone else, I will see you in our Discord 24/7 and next week for our
Cool.
hangouts. All
Thanks,
right,
y'all.
bye everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Take care.